We now move on to discuss Magento 2 configuration. Now, files are split by function and meaning, so you are left with a bigger number of XML files. Each type of config file has one specific purpose and syntax. For example, each module has a module.xml for module declaration, a config.xml for default settings of system configuration fields, an event.xml for events, and so on. These XML files tend to be rather small, and each file follows a very strict syntax that is validated using an XSD. This is helpful for developers because modern IDEs often offer auto-completion. Within this section, we will discuss these key topics: module configuration files, error reporting settings.
Magento is a highly configurable system. Many different configuration files and configuration options exist in Magento. Overall configuration can be broken into three major groups. Application configuration includes configuration files which defines Magento instance settings, such as database connection, cache configuration, Magento mode, and so on. Modules configuration is represented by a set of configuration files in each module's etc folder. There are tens of possible configuration files allowed there. We will cover many of them during this course. Magento has core modules and custom modules, and both have their own configuration files. System configuration is a configuration that is available for a merchant. It is saved in the database and rendered in the admin panel. Application configuration is located in the app etc folder. There are multiple config files there. The most interesting for us are the following. env.php contains information about connection to the database, cache configuration, Magento mode, and so on. config.php is an auto-generated file containing a list of modules with the flags that indicate whether the module is enabled or not. di.xml contains general DI configuration which is not specific to any module. We will talk about DI later in the course. db_schema.xml has an instruction to create a patch_list table which is used to process data and schema patches. Modules configuration is located in the etc folder. Config files, except module.xml, could be in etc area folder. Area could be front-end, admin HTML, cron, web API_REST, web API_SOAP. If a config file is located in etc area folder, it will only take effect for this folder. Each module may have different config files. The general ones, introduced by the framework, are di.xml, db_schema.xml, module.xml, events.xml, acl.xml, menu.xml, and system.xml. We will cover different config files in the corresponding sections. In Magento configuration, XML files are merging. It means that if multiple modules declare the same config file, the system will see the merged result. This is applicable to all modules' XML configuration files. It is possible to define the rule of merging configuration files.
In Magento 2, there are two main ways to store configuration values: in a database for merchants and in XML files for developers. Storing the configuration in a database in the table core config data allows a merchant to be able to change it through a generic interface. Therefore, database-level configuration options are usually ones that a merchant can understand and change using the back-end interface. XML file-level configuration options are usually more technical and should be changed by a developer. The names of XML files generally make their function obvious, such as widget.xml, events.xml, and routes.xml. Magento 2 has added some important new XML files, most notably the module.xml and the di.xml. This diagram displays the core config data table structure, which stores the configuration data a merchant specifies using the admin interface. Core config data includes scope and scope ID fields. Scope can be global, website, or store. If scope is set to website, the scope ID is treated as website ID. If scope is set to store, it is a store ID. For global scope settings, it does not apply. Here is a picture of the backend admin system configuration settings interface. For Magento 2 XML configuration files, there are three scopes: global, front-end, and admin. Some configuration options are scopable, others not. For example, an event can be either global or front-end or admin, whereas the module.xml file can only be in the global scope. If a configuration file is placed directly within the etc directory of a module, its values are applied in the global scope. To specify front-end or admin HTML scope values, the configuration file needs to be placed in the folders etc frontend or etc admin HTML respectively. Each scope corresponded to a different branch of XML within a single configuration file. The system will load only the configuration data that is needed. For front-end requests, it will not load values from the admin HTML folder and vice versa. If you need to specify values for both admin HTML and front-end, a global scope file can be used. If the same configuration file is present in both the global scope and the request scope directories, they will be loaded and merged together. Note that some configuration options work only on the back-end, admin, some on the front-end, and some on both, global. Let's now discuss the merging of configuration files. In Magento, nodes are merged based on their XPaths and then identifier attributes. The assigned identifier must be unique for all nodes nested under the same parent node. Otherwise, an error occurs. Magento 2 uses schemas to make validation of configuration files faster and easier. In Magento 2, in addition to every .xml file, there is an XSD file that helps validate against a schema. The most important .xsd files are located under lib, internal, Magento framework, and other directory branches. Example: events are declared within the events.xml file, and then the configuration type is validated in the events.xsd file. The events.xsd file is located at lib, internal, Magento, framework, event, etc, events.xsd.
Each XML file in Magento usually has its own XSD schema. XSD schema is specified in the invocation attribute of config node of any XML file, pretty much applicable to any file. So we can see for events XML, the schema is located in the framework event etc events XSD. In the DI XML, schema would be again in Magento framework object manager etc config XSD. So pretty much every XML file in Magento, configuration XML file, would have its XSD schema, which is used for validation of the correct syntax of this file. We can also use XSD schema to better understand syntax of the file and all configuration nodes that are allowed for this file. For example, let's take a look into the schema of the events.xml. This is a file in Magento framework etc event etc events XSD. So here you can see what's allowed inside of the events XML. It should start with config. It should have event node. It should have observer with a name, and you can see how it will be validated and what's allowed or not. So even if we create a new XML, custom XML file, we still will create a validation XSD But all Magento core XML files created by Magento, they all definitely have XSD schema. We can refer to the schema to understand the syntax of the file, and also the schema is used for automatic validation of XML configuration files in Magento.
Magento 2 uses the highest level of error reporting so that even a PHP notice will cause an exception. Note that the way errors are displayed is determined by the mode. In developer mode, errors will be returned as a stack trace, allowing you to see the exception path and refine your code. In other modes, there will only be a message that an error has occurred, but the error itself will be recorded into a log file. See your course exercises guide for instructions on how to complete this exercise and the solution. Congratulations! You have completed Unit 1. You can review the material in this unit or advance to the next course unit, Unit 2.